My name is Margaret Ellis, and I live in Oregon. 15 years ago, my father threw me out like a criminal. Not for stealing, not for betrayal, but for telling the truth, his truth. A secret he buried deep beneath our perfect family image. I still remember the slam of that front door behind me, the way my mother turned her face to the wall, the suitcase in my hand. I was only 19. No money, no home, just silence. I spent years scraping by, aching for their love, waiting for them to realize what they did. But eventually, I stopped waiting. And now when they came to my door, faces hollow with need, they had no idea who I'd become. I was 19 when I was forced to learn that telling the truth could ruin your life. For years I kept my mouth shut. I held my tongue at every family dinner, smiled through every fake prayer circle, and pretended we were the family we claimed to be. My mother, Joan Ellis, was the church deacon's wife, always in pearls, always praising forgiveness. My father, Ronald Ellis, was the man everyone admired, stern but respectable, a pillar in our Oregon town. And me, I was the daughter who was supposed to smile quietly and keep family matters where they belonged, behind closed doors. But I couldn't stay silent anymore. Not after what I saw. I'll never forget that night. The rain was pounding against the windows, and my father had forgotten to log off his email. I wasn't snooping. I swear I wasn't. But I saw the subject line flash before the screen went dark. Can't wait for our next hotel night. That one line shattered everything. My father had been having an affair with a woman from our church, a woman my mother had once nursed through cancer. My stomach twisted and my palms went cold. But I told myself maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it was work-related. I tried to let it go, until I saw them together. One afternoon I walked past the downtown cafe on my way from a volunteer shift. There he was, Ronald Ellis, my father, holding hands with her, laughing, her hand on his thigh, not even trying to hide it. That moment cracked something inside me. The man who'd preached fire and purity to me for years was nothing but a hypocrite. And my mother. She had no idea, or so I thought. I waited 3 days before I told her. I sat her down in the kitchen trembling. My voice was barely above a whisper. "Mom, I need to tell you something about Dad." Her reaction wasn't what I expected. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp in shock. Instead, her jaw clenched. Her eyes narrowed. And her voice, calm, cold, said, "You need to keep your mouth shut." I blinked. "Mom, you knew." "I suspected," she said. "But this family has a name. We have a reputation. And I won't let you destroy it over your emotional exaggerations." "I saw them together," I said. "This isn't a rumor. You will not repeat this. Not to me. Not to your siblings. Not to anyone in church. Do you understand?" I stared at her, heartbreaking. "You'd rather protect him than protect the truth." She stood up. "If you can't be loyal to this family, Margaret, then you don't belong in it." It all happened so fast. Within the hour, my father was home. He didn't even deny it. He didn't explain. He just looked at me like I was the embarrassment. Like I was the one who sinned. "You want to be an adult," he said. "Fine. Start living like one. You've got 1 hour to pack your things and go." I was thrown out over his secret. Me. The daughter who baked with my mother every Sunday, who babysat my little cousins when no one else would, who stayed home during prom to help take care of Grandma when she broke her hip. None of it mattered. The moment I pulled back the curtain on their lie, they acted like I didn't exist. As if I was the disease. The disgrace. I packed a single suitcase. My toothbrush. A few clothes. A $20 bill I had hidden under my mattress. No apology. No hug. No tearful, "I'm sorry it had to be this way." My own father walked me to the front door and slammed it shut behind me. The Oregon rain soaked through my sweater before I even got to the corner of the block. I didn't have a plan. No friends to stay with. No college dorm room waiting. I called 3 cousins, none answered. I walked for hours crying, shaking, soaked, and shivering until I found a church that hadn't locked its side door. I curled up on a bench in the back hallway and cried myself to sleep. That was the night I stopped believing in fairy tale families. That was the night I understood that sacrifice and loyalty meant nothing if they only went one way. I remember whispering to myself in the dark, "You will not die in this. You will not stay broken." And I didn't. But I would never be the same. I didn't know it then, but that night began the slow, silent journey that would one day bring them to my door, old, desperate, and hollow-eyed, and I'd finally be the one with the power. I didn't eat for 2 days. After being cast out, I wandered aimlessly, too numb to cry and too proud to beg. My body ached from the cold, but my heart was worse. It pulsed with this strange, quiet ache, not just from betrayal, but from humiliation. I kept thinking, they really threw me away. Like I was trash. I found myself sleeping behind a laundromat the first night after the church locked its side door. I had no blankets, just a hoodie, and the suitcase that now held everything I owned. The hum of machines and the buzz of flickering neon lights lulled me into shallow sleep. In the morning, I used the restroom to splash cold water on my face. I stared into the mirror at a girl who looked like a ghost of who she used to be. The second night, I found another church. This one had an unlocked storage room behind the sanctuary. I made a bed out of hymnals and cardboard boxes. It wasn't warm, but it was safe. Days blurred together. I survived on day-old bread left behind the bakery. I drank from public fountains. When I felt like I couldn't take it anymore, I whispered my grandmother's words to myself. The people who spit on you today may come begging tomorrow. Just wait. It wasn't hope that kept me going. It was pride. After a week, I found a small note on the church bulletin board. Overnight caregiver needed. 60 week. Room included. Must be discreet. The address was in the old part of town. I knocked on the door with shaking hands. A woman in her 70s opened it. Her name was Mrs. Dolores Whitmore, and she looked like someone's forgotten grandmother, fragile but kind. She examined me with sharp eyes and asked only one question. "Can you sit with me through the night, even when I can't sleep?" I nodded. She let me in. That tiny guest room became my sanctuary. It had a twin bed with a yellow quilt, a chipped desk, and a lamp with a pull string that buzzed when you turned it on. Heaven. Mrs. Whitmore didn't ask questions about my past. She simply said, "People only tell the truth when they think no one's listening. That's when you hear who they really are." She spoke in riddles, but I liked her. She paid me in cash every Friday, handed me tea every morning, and taught me how to sit still with pain without letting it own me. For 2 years I stayed in that house. I helped her bathe, fed her oatmeal, listened to her read her late husband's love letters aloud every evening at 7:30. I never told her about my parents. She never told me about her children. We understood what it meant to be forgotten. But then one morning she didn't wake up. I sat by her side until the paramedics came. They let me ride in the ambulance, and when the nurse asked if I was her granddaughter, I nodded. I don't know why. Maybe because in those 2 years, she had become something close to family. Weeks passed. And then the lawyer called. Mrs. Whitmore had left me something. I expected an old Bible or maybe a photograph. But instead, the lawyer handed me a set of keys, a letter and a small folder of documents. The house was mine. She had left me everything: the house, the antique furniture, a modest savings account, and a trust fund that had quietly grown untouched for years. I opened the letter that night. To Margaret. You sat with me when no one else would. You never asked for anything but gave me back my dignity in my final days. You reminded me what love without condition looked like. That's a debt I can't repay in words. So let my home be yours now. Build something new with it. Something bold. Love, DW. I sat on the floor and wept. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without fear. Owning that house changed everything. I got a second job, this time at a senior care facility. I learned to manage medications, organize schedules, and eventually became a licensed caregiver. The house became a place of healing, not just for me, but for others. I took in 2 other women who'd been through the same kind of exile I had. We called it the Quiet House. From the outside, it looked like a cozy yellow bungalow on the corner of Maple and Pine. But inside, it was a place where discarded women stitched their lives back together. In 5 years, I turned my life around. I bought another house down the block, rented it out. Then another. Real estate became my side hustle. I learned how to invest, how to grow. I wore blazers to meetings. I carried myself like someone who mattered, because now I did. But I never used the Ellis name again. No one in town knew I was the girl they had kicked out. They only saw the businesswoman who sponsored school supply drives, donated to the local library, and quietly helped single mothers start over. I never looked back, until the day someone knocked on my door, and it was my father. I used to think revenge meant screaming, slamming doors, demanding they feel what I felt. But silence was sharper. After I inherited Mrs. Whitmore's home and began to rebuild my life, there was a temptation to make noise. To march back to my parents' church in my pressed slacks and gold bracelet, to sit in the front pew, just so they'd have to look at me, just so I could watch them squirm. But I didn't. Instead, I made sure they didn't know a thing about who I had become. I changed my name on every business card and legal document M. Wren. Wren was the name of the tiny bird that once landed on the hospital windowsill while I waded through one of Mrs. Whitmore's overnight emergencies. It felt like a sign, small but unshakable. Just like me. And so Margaret Ellis disappeared. But I kept an eye on them. It's funny what people reveal when they think you're gone. A friend from high school worked at the same bank where my father had once strutted in like a king. One day she let slip that his construction company Ellis & Sons was in trouble. Lawsuits, unpaid taxes, subcontractors threatening to walk. And the town was watching. But Ronald Ellis was too proud to admit it. He'd show up to the Chamber of Commerce luncheons in his old navy blue suit, smiling like the emperor he used to be. What no one knew was that he was slowly bleeding out behind the scenes. I knew, but I didn't call. I could have reached out when my mother fell and broke her hip. She was admitted to Mercy General 2 floors below, where I was giving a lecture on elder care transitions. I walked past her name on the patient board and paused. Joan Ellis, room 218. I didn't go in. I stood outside the door for 7 minutes. My heart was racing. My hands shook. And then I turned around and walked away.
Why?
Because I remembered the look in her eyes the day she told me to keep my mouth shut. I remembered the way she stood behind my father while he kicked me out. The way she folded her arms, choosing silence instead of protection. I owed her nothing. In silence, I bloomed. My real estate business expanded 5 rental homes, a small nursing placement agency, and a nonprofit for women leaving toxic households. All in my new name. All without fanfare. I didn't want applause. I wanted distance. People started whispering about that Wren woman. They didn't know I was the girl once chased out in the rain. All they knew was I never showed up to charity galas or posed for newspaper spotlights. I funded everything anonymously. I kept my face out of photos. I gave to others the one thing no one gave me: a second chance. But even in my success, there were nights I dreamed of their faces. Sometimes I dreamed of my father begging me to come home. Other nights, I'd wake up soaked in sweat after dreaming my mother slapped me across the face again and again, calling me ungrateful. The past never truly leaves, but I wasn't waiting for closure anymore. I had learned that healing didn't always come from apologies. Sometimes it came from watching your enemies fade into irrelevance while you rise. That's what I was doing, rising. And yet life has a cruel sense of timing. 15 years after the night I was exiled, I sat at my kitchen island sipping black tea, finalizing the lease papers for a new tenant. The morning was still. The house smelled like lemon polish and lilacs. Peace. Then I heard it. A knock. 3 slow, hesitant taps. I opened the door and saw 2 figures I never expected to face again. My father, Ronald Ellis, and beside him my brother David, older, now gaunt, his once pristine jacket covered in road dust and shame. For a second I thought I was dreaming. Ronald's eyes didn't hold judgment anymore. They held something worse, desperation. I didn't move. He looked me up and down. I could tell he recognized the house. He'd once driven past it with scorn, called it old lady garbage when Mrs. Whitmore passed. He had no idea it was now mine. He cleared his throat. "Is this the residence of Emsa Wren?" I nodded slowly. David looked like he wanted to vanish into the porch floorboards. We're looking for assistance," my father said stiffly. "We heard you help people. That you might have rooms. For people who have fallen on hard times." I said nothing. He squinted, stepping closer. And then it happened. His eyes widened. His mouth opened. "Margaret?" He hadn't seen me in 15 years, but he knew. I didn't answer. I just let the silence sit there like thunder. For the first time in his life, Ronald Ellis looked small. And for the first time in mine, I felt tall. It was surreal standing in my own doorway, dressed in pressed slacks and a silk blouse, while the man who once kicked me out stood there with dirt on his shoes and shame in his eyes. "Margaret," my father said again, his voice hoarse. "I didn't invite them in. Not yet." David wouldn't even look me in the eye. His hands were jammed deep in his coat pockets, his head slightly bowed like a boy caught stealing. His once clean-cut hair was greasy, unkempt. This wasn't the brother I remembered. The boy who used to poke fun at me for being too sensitive had lines in his face now etched deep from regret or something worse. You're the one they call Ms. Wren," my father asked, finally connecting the dots. I nodded, slowly, not saying a word. I wanted him to feel every second of the recognition, every breath of the power shift. His eyes scanned the porch, then the front of the house, then the street, like he needed to verify this wasn't some cruel hallucination. "This was Dolores Whitmore's house," he mumbled. "Yes," I said calmly. "She left it to me, after I cared for her, when no one else would." Silence. His throat bobbed. "We didn't know. We never knew what happened to you. You never asked." He winced at that. "Good. Let it sting. We've fallen on hard times," he said, voice thin. "Business is gone. I lost the house. Your mother's in assisted care. David, he's been struggling since the divorce. We've been staying in shelters the past 2 weeks." I folded my arms. He looked up at me, and for a fleeting second I saw a flicker of the man I used to believe in. The father who taught me to ride a bike, who carried me on his shoulders at the county fair. But that man had buried me alive beneath his ego, his secrets, his cowardice. "We were told you help people," he whispered, "that you run a program." "I do. Could we stay, just until we figure things out?" His voice cracked on the word stay. It wasn't just a question. It was a surrender. I stared at him, at David, at the 2 men who stood silently by while I was exiled like some plague. And now they stood on my doorstep, needing my grace. I stepped aside. "Guest house is in the back," I said. "Separate entrance. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. No smoking. No shouting. No disrespect." David looked stunned. My father nodded stiffly like he didn't know whether to be grateful or ashamed. They followed me around the house. The guest house was modest, just over 600 square feet, but clean, warm, and furnished. A bed, a couch, a tiny kitchen, and a basket of folded towels I had left in the hallway. They stepped inside like men entering a chapel. "I'll bring food in the morning," I said. "You'll help out around the property. Chores, yard work. No handouts here." They both nodded, silent, humbled. I stood at the doorway and watched them settle in. It was the same room where I had once sobbed myself to sleep, where I had washed Mrs. Whitmore's feet, where I had nursed her through her final weeks. And now, it was where they would live. "Margaret," my father said before I could leave. "Thank you." I looked at him. "No need to thank me," I said. "This isn't mercy. It's repayment." He flinched, and I turned and walked away. That first night, I barely slept. I stood at my bedroom window for hours watching the guest house from across the yard. The lights flicked on, then off. I imagined them trying to sleep, haunted by the silence, the past, the guilt, and me. I felt no pity. Not yet. I spent the next few days keeping my distance. I left breakfast on their doorstep at 7 a.m. sharp, a tray of oatmeal coffee and vitamins. I added a list of tasks: pulling weeds, repainting the back fence, cleaning the gutters. They did everything without question. They didn't ask to come inside the main house. They knew better. It was a strange reversal. 15 years ago, I had begged for a bed, for a voice, for the smallest space to exist. And now, they were the ones standing in the cold, hoping I wouldn't close the door. I didn't speak to them much, just enough to instruct, just enough to make it clear I was no longer the girl they abandoned. I was the woman who had built her kingdom brick by brick from the ashes of their rejection. But even so, I wasn't cruel. When the weather turned cold, I brought them jackets. When David had a coughing fit, I sent cough syrup and menthol rub. Not because they deserved it, but because I did. I deserved to do this on my terms, without letting vengeance harden my soul. A week later, I returned home from a meeting to find the back fence freshly painted, the flower beds trimmed, and the walkway swept. And a note under my door: I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know you were right. I should have listened. I should have protected you. Not him. Not the image. Dad. I read it 3 times, then folded it. I didn't cry. But I did close my eyes and exhaled for the first time in years, because this time, the silence was mine. Every morning I laid the tray down on the wooden bench outside their door. Coffee, bread, boiled eggs. Just enough. No luxuries. No welcome mat. I didn't speak. I didn't ask how they slept. I didn't invite them in. It was the same way I had once been treated, like a shadow in someone else's home. And now it was their turn to live in the shadows. My father, once the man who held court at church luncheons and barked orders from polished leather chairs, now pulled weeds in silence, his knees popping as he crouched. His hands, once soft with indoor pride, turned rough and blistered. I watched from the kitchen window as he tried to fix the gutter with trembling fingers. Once he slipped and fell. He didn't even cry out. Just sat there for a moment, staring at the sky like it owed him something. I didn't run to help. David cleaned out the shed. He looked like a different man. Hair buzzed, short bags under his eyes, silent, compliant. He didn't argue, didn't talk back, just nodded when I handed him the rake. It was eerie how quiet they were, but that's how I had lived for years. Quiet, careful, constantly watching my tone, my movements, my place in the world. Now they were learning what it felt like to be tolerated rather than loved. I made rules. They followed them. No entering the main house. No asking for favors. No leaving dirty dishes outside. I kept things professional, sterile, as if they were strangers renting a space on my land. Because in many ways, they were. I never asked about my mother. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know if I could bear the answers. I told myself I didn't want her apologies if they ever came. I told myself that if she'd truly regretted what she did, she would have found me. But she hadn't. 15 years, and not one phone call. Not one letter. Not one knock. So I stopped wondering if she ever would. Instead, I focused on my routines, my clients, my rental homes, my little nonprofit. And every morning when I handed off the daily chore list, I looked my father in the eye and waited. I wanted to see if he'd ask to talk, if he'd ask to be forgiven, if he'd show the same fire in his eyes that once ignited when he cast me out. But all I saw now was a hollow man trying to prove he still had use. One day I brought them a second-hand heater. The temperature had dropped, and I'd noticed frost on their windows. My father opened the door in socks and a worn cardigan I didn't recognize. His voice cracked when he said, "Thank you." I shrugged. I'd never let anyone freeze on my property. His lip trembled. He nodded once and closed the door. Later that evening, I passed by the guest house and heard murmurs through the thin walls. My father's voice low and ashamed, muttering something I couldn't make out. And David, crying. I didn't feel joy in their pain. That's not what this was. This was balance. This was justice. When I was 19, I had sobbed into my sleeves, eating crackers in church basements, wondering what I'd done to deserve abandonment. Now they were the ones lying awake at night facing everything they had refused to acknowledge, not just poverty, but pride turned to ash. One morning, David approached me while I was trimming the rose bushes. "I'd like to work," he said. I looked up. "You already do." "No, I mean real work. Full time. You said you manage housing units. If there's a place I can clean, repair, maintain, I want to earn again. I want to be useful." His eyes weren't begging. They were resolute. Like he was finally stepping out of his father's shadow and into his own guilt. I gave him a chance. One of my tenants had recently vacated a small duplex across town. I let David clean and repaint it. He showed up on time, called me Ms. Wren, and worked until his hands were red. He didn't ask for pay, just purpose. I gave him both. My father watched from the garden, silent. He was slower, stiffer now. He took longer to complete his chores, and sometimes I had to redo them myself. But I let him continue. Not because he earned it, but because I needed him to sit in the discomfort of being seen by me as weak, aging, and human. Weeks passed, and then one Sunday morning I made tea. Just one cup. I walked out to the porch and sat in the same chair Mrs. Whitmore used to rock in. I thought about the old woman who had taken me in when I had nothing. I thought about the quiet power of service, of stillness, of watching your enemies become your students. My father approached slowly, hands folded in front of him. "May I sit?" I nodded. He sat on the top step, not beside me, but below me. Like he understood something had shifted forever. "I used to think power came from being right," he said. "From control. From silence. But I was wrong. You were just a child. And I was a coward." I said nothing. "I saw what you saw," he whispered. "And instead of facing it, I punished you. Because that was easier than facing myself." I sipped my tea. The steam curled into the cool morning air. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he added, "but I needed you to know. I remember everything." That made me look at him. Finally. "I remember your tears on the front step. I remember the sound of the door shutting. I've heard it every night for 15 years. He looked old in that moment, not just aged, but emptied. I didn't offer him absolution, but I nodded once, just once, and for him that seemed like everything. Some men fall all at once, loudly, shamefully, like crashing trees in the middle of a storm. My father crumbled slowly, like an old building eaten from the inside by silence and rot. It started in his eyes. Not the way they looked at me, but how they avoided the mirror. I noticed it one morning when I brought over fresh fruit. He was sitting at the kitchen table in the guest house, staring into a blank mug like it held something sacred. "You didn't sleep again?" I said, my voice neutral. He didn't deny it, just gave a tired nod. That week he missed his chores, forgot to trim the hedges, left the broom propped against the wall unmoved for days. The yard began to wilt in places, and I could feel his pride breaking one thread at a time. Then on a Wednesday afternoon, David came knocking, face pale, lips tight. "Dad's not well," he said. "He hasn't eaten, barely moves. He just sits." I didn't rush over. I waited. 2 hours. 3. And then, as the sun began to dip into the trees, I stepped into the guest house and found him exactly as David described, sitting unmoving, staring at the floor, like it was the only thing left in the world he could trust. "Dad," I said gently. He blinked. Slowly. Looked up. His face was thinner than I remembered. Older. Collapsing inward like a man losing the last layer of armor. "I don't feel right," he whispered. "I know. I've been hearing things." I sat across from him. No table between us. Just air. He opened his mouth twice before words finally formed. "There's something I never said. Something I should have said the night I threw you out." My hands clenched in my lap. I didn't interrupt. He took a long, shaking breath. "I was terrified of you. That stunned me. Not because of what you did," he continued, "but because you saw me. Really saw me. The man behind the tie. The man behind the Sunday smiles. I thought if I silenced you, I could stay the version of myself I liked, the man who kept his world in order. But you You tore the mask off. His voice cracked. I didn't hate you, Margaret. I hated the part of myself that let it happen, that let the lies fester. I told myself I was protecting your mother, but really, I was protecting the illusion. Tears welled in his eyes. He didn't wipe them, just let them fall one by one. I should have stopped the affair. I should have confessed. I should have begged for help. But instead, I let pride become punishment. And I chose you as the price. I felt something shift in my chest, a weight not lifting but loosening. He looked up at me with trembling lips. I ruined you. You didn't ruin me, I said, voice quiet but steady. You redirected me, and I rebuilt myself from pieces you never cared to pick up. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know, but I need to say this anyway. He took a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to me. I opened it slowly. It was the letter I had written my mother 15 years ago, the one I slipped into her Bible the night I was thrown out. A desperate plea for understanding, for protection. I never thought she'd read it. She kept it, he said, tucked inside her jewelry box. I found it when we were packing what little was left. She read it often. Tears burned in the corners of my eyes. I pressed the paper to my chest, shaking. She never stopped thinking about you, he added. She just didn't know how to make it right. And now? He shook his head. She's fading. Dementia. Some days she thinks you're still in the kitchen making banana bread. The tears spilled down my cheeks. Not just for the past, but for the pieces of love that had survived in silence. I'm sorry, Margaret. For everything. For the years. For the exile. For not protecting you when you were only trying to protect us. He reached out not for a hug, but just to touch my hand. And I let him. His skin was papery, trembling. In that moment, I didn't feel powerful. I felt human. The silence between us wasn't cruel anymore. It was cleansing. He lowered his head. I thought I'd die never saying it. But I need you to know I was wrong. About you. About everything. I nodded, voice thick. I know. We sat like that for a long time. Two broken people holding the sharp edges of the past between them, realizing neither one of us would ever be who we once were. But maybe, just maybe, we could both be something better. He fell asleep on the couch that night, the letter tucked beside him like a relic. And for the first time since I was 19, I whispered something into the stillness of the room. I forgive you. Not for him, but for me. Forgiveness isn't a door you open wide. It's a window you crack when the air inside becomes too heavy to breathe. After my father's confession, the silence between us softened. Not warm, not cozy, but no longer sharp. Just quiet. Honest. He began to change. He said thank you more. Asked about the people I worked with, the women I helped. Sometimes we'd sit outside in the early morning sipping coffee as the world woke up. No lectures. No guilt. Just two souls who had survived themselves. David continued working for me, painting, fixing, driving the other women in my program to appointments. He was rebuilding quietly. I caught him once in the garden teaching a young woman how to plant basil. It moved me in a way I didn't expect. Then one crisp morning in late autumn, I got a call from the care facility. My mother was slipping. They told me she'd been asking for someone named Little Bird. My breath caught. It was her nickname for me back when I was 5, when I used to sing in the kitchen and perch on her lap like a sparrow. Would you like to come? The nurse asked. I hesitated. For hours I walked the house in circles, that name echoing in my ears. Little Bird. The girl they tossed aside. The girl who learned to fly without them. That evening I drove to the home. I brought a bundle of fresh lilacs. My mother's favorite. She lay in bed, frail and paper thin, her eyes searching the ceiling as if looking for something she had lost years ago. When I stepped in, she didn't recognize me at first. But when I sat beside her, placed the lilacs on her chest and whispered, "It's me, Mama." Something lit up behind her eyes. Her hand fluttered in the air like a weak wing. I took it. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I was so scared. Of him. Of the truth. Of losing what I built." "You didn't lose me," I said. "You gave me away." Tears slipped from her eyes. "But I forgive you." She turned her head toward me. "Why?" "Because I'm no longer who I was. and I won't let what you did define what I become." Her fingers squeezed mine barely softly, but it was there. She passed 3 days later. At the funeral, I stood in the back. No black veil, no spotlight, just presence. My father asked me to say something. I declined. Some words don't belong in eulogies. A week after we buried her, he came to the main house and stood at the porch like he used to. Head bowed, hands clasped. I was thinking he said maybe we could all move back home. Try again. Start over. I smiled gently. But it was a different kind of smile. "Dad, you're welcome to stay in the guest house as long as you need. But that's not my home anymore. I've already started over." He looked down, nodding. He understood. "Where will you go?" I bought a cottage outside Ashland. 2 acres. Quiet. I'm opening a retreat for women like me. Women who survived being erased. He blinked, stunned. "Alone." "No," I said, "with peace." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was no argument to make, and for once he didn't try. That night I packed my things, left behind the house that had once saved me. I lit a candle in the window before I left one last gesture to the ghosts who used to haunt me. I arrived at my new home just before sunrise. The air was clean. The hills stretched out like open arms. The cottage was simple but mine. I walked inside, set down my bags, and exhaled. I was free. Free from waiting. Free from proving. Free from the ache of old wounds reopened just to see if they still bled. I had forgiven. But I had also chosen. Chosen to live without the need to be needed. Chosen to build something that didn't depend on someone else's repentance. I still visit the city once a month. I check on David. I fund the care facility in my mother's name. I make sure the guest house stays stocked. But I don't linger, because I've written my ending, and it doesn't lead back to them. It leads forward, to sunlit porches, to open journals, to rooms filled with women who, like me, were once told they didn't matter. I tell them the truth. Forgiveness is a gift, but it's not a contract. You can love someone and still walk away. My name is Margaret Ellis, and I have finally flown free